What's up, my pixelated party people? How are you? In today's tutorial series, we're going to go over create layers in Figma, the first time experience, what to expect, setting up a new file. I'm going to import some artwork that I sketched up. We'll talk about the organization and structure of that file, and we'll go ahead and create layers. So stick around, stay tuned, tag along. Create layers Figma. We're going to go over the first time experience, what to expect after you've signed up, setting up a new file. I'll import some artwork that I've been working on, quick sketch. We'll discuss the structure, how I'll break it down, create the different layers for the elements, and how you can use this approach in Figma, but you can also take this approach to any type of graphical editing software that allows for the creation of layers. Telemarketer headset on. Back to the tutorial. So after you've signed up, you're going to get faced with this welcome screen. First time user experience. That's how it goes. You don't have to create a team. I'm not, maybe I'll create a team. Why not? You could skip it if you wanted to. The benefits of creating a team: organizing your files, your members on those teams, collaboration is a little bit easier. That's the gist of it. So as a solo designer or a solo, individual, you don't necessarily need a team, but in this case, I'll do it just for completeness. So the team's named, I could share this link if I wanted to. I don't have any invites to send it to. Oh, no friends. And then we're just going to stick with the starter plan. But anything you need to do or want to do or are going to do, especially in this tutorial, are free. So in this case, we're going to be designing with Figma. So we're going to click Design with Figma. If this is your first time and you want to be guided down a path, you can click Blank Canvas. You can jump into the community, or you can go and hit Explore Myself. I'm going to explore myself because I want you to see this screen. Once you pop into the screen, this is going to be your home screen. This is going to be your dashboard. It's labeled as Recents. Recents is where you're going to find all the recently opened files that you've had. You're going to be hit with some calls to action. You're going to be hit with some sections that have additional information in it. So from top to bottom, left to right, I'll just go really quickly what you'll find here. In this area where it says Pity Punks, this is your user information. It shows who's signed in, what you're signed in for, etc. You can click on the community. You can navigate into the community. You can explore all the different fun stuff. Or you can go back to your profile where your design work is going to be. Search bar is pretty self-explanatory, but if you need to search for stuff, if you have a ton of things going on here, you can't necessarily find it. Search can come in handy. Alerts, notifications, this is where you'll find, if you're collaborating, this is where you'll find a bunch of information, updates, etc. Pretty standard. And then profile information if you want to get saucy and go through that. I'm not going to. Drafts are where you're going to find your recently drafted files. Community is how you're going to access community stuff, once again. And upgrade, sales. Pity Punks NFT here is the team that we created. That's where we'll be working. Right now, we don't have any projects within it. We'll create when we get there. And if we wanted to create a new team, we could go through that process again. In the team setting, it will show us who's in our team. If we had more members, those members would be present. And we can also make adjustments to the actual settings itself. So I pop back into the recents. I can jump right into a design file here by clicking Create New. What that does is that opens up this interface. So now you're in your Figma document. You'll see a few things. You'll see a top bar. You'll see a left panel. You'll see a right panel. The top bar are your controls, your tools, your elements. It's how you access your files. It's how you access pretty much like that file menu you would see in any of your software applications. You have your move tool, your scale tool, your frame tool, your slice tool, your vector shapes, etc. You have your pen tool and your pencil tool. Text, you have your hand to move the canvas. You have your communicator to make conversations. You have your profile. You can share this document if you want. If you're building a prototype, you can play the prototype. We're not going to be building a prototype. That's a different type of product use case. And then you have your zooms and your ability to turn on grids and turn off grids. And this is your design pane. So this will change based on what's happening. For the most part, you're only going to see design and only have to worry about what's going on here. And this will update as we start to build out the document and we start to go over different things in creating layers Figma for this NFT project. So that is a new document. That is how you create a new document. That's how you'll get started. So now I have a organized container for my items, and I can go ahead and get started sorting out how to create layers Figma. Give that a quick name. And here in this menu, I'll see a few things. One of the great things about Figma, if you are familiar with software design or anything like that, there's version histories. And version history was started to slowly get added into graphic software. Figma, they built that in straight away. And if there was a series of changes or edits to this document, we could go back to different timestamps, pull that version of the document up, look at it, merge it back into the current document that we have, accepting or losing changes depending on what has happened, and then going for there. So it's kind of like a fail-safe. If we make a major mistake, we can step back in time, go from that point, and start over. But then there's a whole bunch of other stuff. So here we are, the very start of our project. But to create those layers, let's take a look at this. Let's first dissect the artwork, see what we have here, talk about then how we might create a production process around it. So we have this angry pit bull. He looks like he's got his face ripped open and laser beams are shooting out of it. We can definitely discern he's angry, by the snarl on his face and his closed fist and this raising of a weapon here. So in doing so, it looks like our little pit bull is ready for battle. And we got ourselves a little, gangster. Anyways, in this little artwork, we have multiple different layers of elements, but we also have different facets that we need to consider and how that works. And what I like to do and how I like to think about this are the different components that are making this up. So to break this down really simply, if we think about how this is structured, right, how this drawing is structured, we have the gun, we have the background, we have the character, right, and then we have character embellishments, okay? And what I mean by that are, the ripped up face, the laser beams shooting out of his eyes. Maybe if he had any tattoos, we could put tattoos on his face. Even if we wanted something on the jacket, we could put something there. But the reason why I break it down like this is because we want to look at the basic shapes. And in those basic shapes, we realize we might have some more complexities going on. For example, this gun. This gun's got a laser beam. It's got a modified stock. The barrel. It's got missiles. What freak is going on? This is a pretty serious modified gun. So there's going to be layers. There's going to be different elements that are going to go into this. And if we look at it like that, we have the scope, we have the stock, we have the barrel, we have the missiles, right? And then in each of these, there's stuff going on. Maybe the scope has a laser. Well, the scope definitely has, some sort of sight and laser body. So now we have a couple more layers we're going to consider. If we go over here to the stock, right, we have the actual stock itself, and then we have the end or the butt of the stock. And that could be more complex depending on how we drew that. We have the barrel itself. We have the muzzle. And that has, the holes inside of it. And at the end of the barrel, we have a sight, right? So there's even more layers and more aspects. And as an embellishment, we have the missiles. So we have a missile holder, Man, I spelled missiles wrong too. Missile holder. We have the missile itself. And that missile has a top and a missile has a tail. And that's just the gun alone. And that gun could have one, two, three, four main layers. And each of those four main layers could have subsequent layers or groupings within there. If we go to the background, we can see in this example, it's just a solid. So there's only one really, thing to worry about there. But if we go over here to the character, we have to consider now that we have the character body, we have the character limbs, we have the character head. And in the character's head, we have the character's face, right? So each of those core elements, and we also have the character's clothes. Each of those core 5 elements, there's going to be different aspects that are made up. Damn dog. That are made up, as part of the layering and the groups of layers for this, particular artwork. So if I wanted to dive into the face and kind of break that down, well, we have the snout, we have the snarl, we have the eyes, the eyebrows, right? We have the ears. I didn't get the nose, silly me. Cool, just the basics, right? I'm not going to dive too deeply into this. If you see this now, and you take a look at this here, you can see, in order to create layers for your document, if you don't have the capability in your mind to break this down, or if you don't hold the entire vision in your head of whatever it is, you can work through that process, but you can also work through that process in a very precise manner. So in this aspect, what I'm doing here is I'm just organizing my document real quick, and I'm going to call this the sketch, right? I'm just naming these layers, because effectively what we've done is just create layers without really even talking about that or really even doing that. All I did was just duplicate this one layer. So when you're in Figma, it's important to understand that you see all this gray space, that's your canvas, that's your free area that you can putz around and play. There's nothing constraining you except the limitation of the actual canvas itself. It's called an infinite canvas, but there is a finite, edge. In order to work within this document and be a little more organized, what we can do is create what's called a frame. And a frame, think of it like a container or an NFT, because that's what it is. It's an empty box that's going to be holding an element. We can just hit A, on the keyboard and draw a frame. We could even resize it. Now we have a nice starting point to work with. So we have our frame, which is a layer in the canvas. However, it's acting as a container for the layers within the frames. We can begin working on our document here, and we can start to look at what we need to break this down into to create the artwork here. We already took a moment to understand that each of these different elements are going to require, different sets of layers and groupings of layers themselves. What we haven't spoken about are the axes in which these elements fall. So I'm going to try to do this. I don't know. If you're familiar with web, there's what's called a z-index. If you're familiar with other stuff, I'm sure you've heard of a z-index. In perspective and drawings and stuff like that, we have z-indexes as well. Let me just, because I don't want anybody to have a fucking seizure, if it's not all on point here. Oh, everything's not crossing. It's not mathematically correct. Well, look at that. They're all in the square there. Z index is the stacking from the back to the front, right? And I bring that up because when we go back to our little bit of our groups and our layers here, we have to think through the construction of the graphic that we're trying to create. In the forefront of the image, we have the hand and the gun. It is the closest item within the range. So we need to think about where that's going to fall, right? If we go back to our little drawing here, I could have saved us a lot of time if I just used the shortcut, but I never do. Let's try that. What I want you to see is what I'm trying to illustrate here. In the forefront, right, it's the arm and the hand. Immediately behind it, it's the gun. Immediately behind that is the body. However, really, immediately behind that is the head. Because if you see how the head actually overlaps on the body, you start to notice, oh, I might have to construct this itself in multiple different variations. So if you look at what we got going on here, when we think about the layering of a project, we also need to think about the layer order and the layer stacking. Stacking is a concept used in computer programming as well. You can Google that. We're not going to go over that. That's not what that today is. But when you think this, you see this, and we start to work on this document here. As we go in, we look about, all right, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? How are we going to create these layers? So if I know, that this is in the foreground and this is in the background, or the body is in the background, I can start to choose, where do I really want to start? How do I really want to begin creating? Well, we can do this a couple different ways. We can use a pen tool, and we can simply just begin to create shapes, because eventually, out of nothing becomes something, you know what I mean? So, and I'm not going to try to be too precise. I'm just going to create these shapes real quick, because I can go back and, where is the thing? Here. I can click on this, and I can click on these points, and I can make edits to the points how I want. Full disclaimer, I used predominantly Adobe Illustrator to create vector graphics. If you're new at this and you see me making mistakes, it's just because this is not my native tool. But the process is the same. Here we are, friend. We're starting to create our first shape, okay? We're starting to create the basic layers of our document, which is contained here in our frame. And what we can do, I've only put that color there as a way to make it easier to see. But what we can do is we can start to draw these shapes in a way we think that they might show up. So, okay, I started with the body. I realize, maybe I need to do the arm next. And because it's not that I'm being lazy, but I'm just saying this is the style of the artwork that I want to create. It's very cartoony, very blocky. I'm just going to use these rando commando shapes and call it a day. And then just keeping true to ourselves, I'll just go ahead and and there will be a point in time where I'm just going to end up speeding this up to make it easier. Okay, so let's zoom out. Let's turn off the visibility of our source, our sketch, and let's look at what we've created. So far, we have the basic structure of the body, the limbs, and the weapon for our literal cartoony character, right? We've layered all of these elements in the document, simply through the creative process, right? And they also got stacked and ordered based on where they fall in our creation process. So what I mean by that, if you remember, we started here, right? Vector 1 with the body. And then I went into the arm and created these shapes, but now it's saying that this is over here on top of the body, right? Well, that's because when I created these shapes, I duplicated one of the shapes in here, which also carried the properties, the ordering properties in this particular document. You know, it doesn't always happen in every editing software, but it can, and it did. And it's important because what I'm doing now is I'm going to go ahead and start grouping these layers, make it easier for me to understand how to manage the different elements, right, that go into it. So if I go ahead and I start here, we can say that is the left limb because of how he's facing. You know, we can start here and we can call this the body base. Call it what you will, call it what you want. Naming is always something that takes work. That's, you know, never too easy peasy to come up with. But I'm just trying to be as semantic as possible. In just keeping with this, I'm looking through the different elements here and going and finding what we need. And on, and on, and on, and on, and I would keep going all the way through this. So I'm going to pause the video here. I'm going to go through, I'm going to do all of that. I'm going to finish out the line art, and we'll jump back into the next part. I jumped back into this tutorial, picking up where we left off. You know, we left off with me creating some of the basic shapes, the basic structures, showing you how to stack those items in order from background to foreground, foreground to background, front to back, z-index. So I went ahead, finished out the rough line art for this illustration, and I've cleaned up the document slightly here to my left. I finished out all the line work, and I wanted to keep it empty to show you the different overlap and what you need to think about when you're creating layers, NFTs, Figmas, Photoshop, Illustrator, whatever tool, whatever application you want to use. You can see how the different overlapping affects the different areas of the actual design. You could see how the stacking of the different elements create the design itself. And you could see how, you know, as you go to finalize this artwork, maybe as you go to color it, if you are doing what's called a vector illustration, you might need to build different shapes in order to achieve different effect. By getting to this point, you could start to see the complexities of how these designs, you know, grow and how they could become. And, you know, just really moving through that too, this is the very base of what you could do with a character. You know, as I built out the head and I built out the different elements, you know, I started to build out these basic shapes, and I started to look at how it would be structured in general. So, you know, if I turn off this, for example, right, and we're just left with the basics here. Let me get off the scars. Did I not? Okay. You know, you can see the basic structure of the head and what was necessary to go into, you know, creating the shape of the head. You know, because if you think about how the hoodie would sit, you know, it would sit over top the actual head. You have to think of like even how to create different shapes in order to create layers, because sometimes an element like this hoodie, for example, takes different shapes to create the base shape, but that base shape may need to be also separated into multiple layers on its own in order to finalize the juxtaposition that you're creating. And I hope that makes sense. You know, if I could try to illustrate that a little bit differently, if we go back to this example here with the stacking and stuff, and then we think about how I could use this circle, right, and cut it out of this shape, but then I need to have shapes in the background for the inner portion, right? And maybe this stuff over here might not be visible, so I don't have to worry about it, but I'll also need shapes in the foreground, you know, as that ties into the body and as it ties into the zipper to kind of create the illusion that the person is actually wearing a hoodie. So you could see how layering, layer ordering and the structuring of our documents is pretty crucial, pretty essential. To create Layers Figma NFT projects as kind of a final layer that we didn't cover, the background itself can be done in a couple different ways in Figma. It really depends on your actual artwork and what you want to create. If we were to stay true to kind of this design that we have sketched out on the left, we would have a square containing element around our character, for example, something like that. This is a great production process that you can take into Photoshop, that you can take into Illustrator. This is a great production process that you can use in Affinity if you need to, because what this is doing is it's allowing you to structure your artwork, your vector graphics, in a way that you could reproduce them easily and use them across different mediums. You can use them across different outputs. You can also use them to easily spin up variations of these one-of-one artworks, similar to a lithograph or any other type of print. So sometimes this takes a little bit more upfront thought and thinking to get through the process and figure out how you're going to produce these. But that is this particular type of art. That is a graphic art. That is, a commercial art, because in this aspect, you want to be efficient, right? If you have to hand off your file to another designer, etc., you want this designer to be able to work through your file and understand it. If you're creating illustrations, and those illustrations are part of a design system, you also have to have guidelines. And these are the types of ways that you can start to structure those guidelines and help people build illustrations, because you may not always have the same illustrator. That's just how commercial art works. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. I'll go into further detail maybe in subsequent videos on how to finish out this vector artwork, and offer that up, for whatever reason, shape, or form later on. I hope this is giving you a visualization on how to create layers Figma for NFT projects and so forth. I hope you understand now the z-index, the stacking, the ordering, and the thought process that can go into the creation of an artwork. Perspective, foreground, background, Y, X, Z index. All of those come into play when doing any type of work, whether it's a painting, whether it's a digital artwork, whether it's an illustration. I hope you enjoyed it. Follow me on the internet, like, subscribe, all those cool things. Dane Wasalko. See you later, alligators.